Good evening, everyone. Well, we're in the stock market. I'm an economist. Perfect. All right. Well, I'm actually a feminist economist, and care labor is a key issue of feminist economics. So, what do feminist economists do, right? So, first thing is we deconstruct hegemonic economic theory. Second, we connect with other issues, be they anti-racist, decolonial, queer, or ecological. And thirdly, we try to make new, better, improved economic theory for the policymakers and for society. I want to show you today how we do this by using some stories. It's getting late, so maybe some fairy tales, and also economic models. So the first model I want to talk about is by Paul Samuelson. He's a very famous economist. If you study economics, you probably have to read his textbook. He wrote literally 10,000 pages of economic theory. I don't know how. And like most important economists, he was an advisor to the government at that time. He was a Democrat and influencing the United States government. He also got the so-called Nobel Prize in Economics. And tonight I want to talk about his 1958 overlapping generations model. You'll be saying it's old. Why do we do that? The model is still in use today because it explains pay-as-you-go pension systems. It sets out to explain how social security systems are constructed. And it also explains long-run economic growth. So this model, it's still lurking in there somewhere. So let's look at the model. This is a household model, so you see a household, right? And you see the labor market, and then you see the square. And now I'm quoting from Samuelson's paper from 1958. He's saying, men entered the labor market at about the age of 20. They work for 45 years or so, and then live for 15 years in retirement. As children, the little balls, they're part of their parents' consumption, and we take no note of them, end quote. This is the overlapping generations model. It's 1950s, we have heteronormative family setting, we have children. What is missing in this model? Anyone? Yeah, well, obviously these children have to be born somehow, right? In a process we call labor, but it's not the labor market, right? So these things are happening, and then, once the women are there, they usually take care of the children, and while they do that, they clean the house, and once they're there, they can also cook and do all these things. It may seem funny, but it also may seem absurd. Why is this invisible? Why is this not in there? And this invisibility is a key issue of feminist economics. We're really worried about that. And Marilyn Waring, a famous New Zealand feminist economist, wrote in 1988 this great book, If Women Counted, say if women were counting all the things that are happening in this economic sphere, that model would probably look a little bit different, right? Okay, so that's the one thing. And then also like the things that are not counted and they're not paid because the woman and the children and all these caregivers, they're outside of the labor market, so everything they do is unpaid today. And then in the future, when these women are older or the caregivers are older or even the migratory workers who take care of the housework in the richer white European families, the pensions are not going to look good. And if you think about Austria today, women's pensions don't even reach 60% of men's pensions. They're really low. Austria is a very rich country, and old age poverty is a woman's issue. So, the models, they're connected to the reality because with these models, policymakers are told how to shape society. So let's go on, see what happens next. Another famous mainstream economist, neoclassical economist, Gary Becker, Chicago School, he kind of caught on to this invisibility gap and he included the wife into the household. So we have the wife now. It's nice, you have the wife, you have the husband, and then you can do like comparative advantage. You can say, okay, one is better in the house, therefore she should stay there. And there's a biological predisposition, etc. So the good thing he did was that he introduced this household sphere into the economic theory. It wasn't there before. Well, it was actually there before. Already in the 1930s, feminist economists worked on that, like Hazel Kirk, Margaret Reed. Well, we didn't read their books, and Gary Becker got the Nobel Prize eventually, also the so-called Nobel Prize for economics, for putting these real-life things into economic theory. And the problem here is not only that these models look very heteronormative, right? You have the husband and the wife. And Gary Becker, actually, he calls queer people, they're not efficient if they have households, because, you know, they don't produce children so well. So it's very inefficient. And also, they're kind of like, he calls them deviants. It's kind of cool to be called a deviant, but anyway. So the problem is also, with these type of models, this household work is naturalized. What that means is there's a gendered division of labor, and everything that tangentially the women or the people in the household do, we think of it as like, it's Mother's Day, right? Mother's love, it's always there. You can always just pop in and she will give you her love and the cake she made for you and the food she made, and then she'll wash your clothes, and you can always do it, you know? And it's this idea that comes with these models. So that's the problem number one. Problem number two, on the very same page of this overlapping generations model paper, Samuelson writes, I'm quoting, "If there were Robinson Crusoe, he would want to trade with Mother Nature for future consumption goods." Now this is quite surprising. He's a character from a 1719 adventure story, right, by Daniel Defoe, and you probably know the story. He was shipwrecked on this island, and they kind of hang out there with him and his buddy Friday, and they have adventures, right? So this is the story. But what is so interesting, Robinson Crusoe, he becomes this quintessential economic man. Ola Grappa, the famous feminist economist, she calls him that, and he's like the protagonist in microeconomic textbooks. If you study economics, you will get to know. Anybody heard about Robinson Crusoe and Friday in economic textbooks? See, everybody raises their hands. And the thing is, we're trying to explain international trade with these two people. We're trying to explain comparative advantage with these two people. But there is a huge, huge problem of invisibility in this problem. And you can see it if you look at this painting of Robinson Crusoe and Friday, where you can see the invisibility in this seemingly neutral model is that there's a hierarchy, a racist hierarchy in this story. The English guy, the white guy, is on top. The native man, Friday, is sitting on the ground. And if you actually read the book, you would know that by profession, Robinson Crusoe is a slave trader. That's his job. Then he strands on the island and he finds this native guy and he makes him his slave and he will be his master. And this is the couple that we're choosing to illustrate microeconomic trade theory. Why? You know, with all these invisible power and exploitation and violence, colonization, all of this is in this seemingly nice example, and that's horrible, but it also is this sign of how is wealth created in Europe and in the colonies. We have this history of exploitation, of slavery, of horrible ways of squeezing out from other countries the wealth that we have here now. That's the one problem, and all economic models, to put it like this, there's no story of, how are the profits made? Are they made by a war? Are they made by violence and appropriation, exploitation? It's never part of this model. It's a huge taboo. We don't like to talk about it. So let's go back to this weird thing. If there were only Robinson Crusoe, he would want to trade with Mother Nature for future consumption goods. Who is this Mother Nature? Where does she come from? So, Mother Nature, of course, is the land where the food is grown, that the people can eat and the animals can eat, etc. And now I want to show you a macroeconomic model. Here's the classical production function, and you can see here economic growth or GDP growth becomes a function of labor, land, and capital. These are the three production factors, and there's some kind of technology that puts them together. And then there will be economic growth or, GDP growth. And this is a production function that Adam Smith would know, Thomas Malthus would know, David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, even Karl Marx would see it like this. And then we had the neoclassical revolution, as we love to call it in economic theory. It's amazing. Neoclassical revolution, and I open my economics textbook when I study economics, and the production function looks like this. Watch closely. What happened? It's invisible. Invisible again. Land is invisible, it's gone. So the same problem. The source of all, how are we going to eat if there's no land, right? Where are we going to sit? Where are we going to put the house? It's just in the air. And it's not just bizarre and funny, it's also really tragic because these values that are not in the model, we're not going to consider, we're not going to say, oh, land, we should not steal and exploit and then take everything. We should not just ditch all the pollution into the river. But if it's not there, it has no value, it's not considered. So this is really, really problematic. Or as Marilyn Waring said, a system that refuses to recognize such values is a system that might eventually kill us all. Seriously, it's bad news. So you can see these examples of really mainstream economic models. You will learn this at school like this and be like, whoa, okay. So these models, they never talk about care. They never, ever, ever talk about power, exploitation, or nurturing, or giving back to the land, as a value per se. So I asked my students for this talk, actually. I said, can you think of any better models that describe the real world better? Maybe you can think of fairy tales that describe the situation better. My students are smart. They suggested Little Red Riding Hood. Perfect. It's a story about invisible things and danger. It's a story about deceit, betrayal, robbery, attempted murder, a story of a free lunch. Or what Adam Smith and Karl Marx would call primitive accumulation. You simply take either from the colonies or you're fencing off the land in the industrialization process. And it's also a story of gluttony and greed. Not just the grandma, we gotta eat the girl too, right? More is better, more is always better, mass consumption, commodity goods, everything. Never stops the increase in utility. So, very good idea to use this story. And it is also a fairy tale where three characters, the women in the family, intergenerational, the grandma, the mother, and the Little Red Riding Hood, they're working together to ensure that grandma, when she's ill, she's not going to die, she's not going to starve because the little girl is bringing her the cake and the wine that the mother prepared. So this is actually a much better overlapping generations model, right? So we're not going to talk about the wolf yet, okay? It's not going to happen. But I thought to myself, okay, maybe this is a moment before we write utopian feminist economics. I actually wrote my dissertation on this. I thought, now we have to have utopian models. But we don't need that right now. The thing we need right now is that we simply include those invisible things in the existing economic models. We need to include this unpaid labor in the household. I mean, the OECD, you know, not radical feminist activists, the OECD said that could be worth about 80% of GDP, so that's not nothing, it's big, right? And it shouldn't just be naturalized and we assume it's just there, we can take it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we need to have economic models that look at where does the profit come from. Is it stolen? Is it extracted by force? Has it been taken in a war? Maybe we should also do reparations, you know, for slavery in the past. They estimated it's 20 trillion US dollars, which is like 2/3 of the outstanding debt in the United States, to just compensate for these 3 hours worked by slaves since the foundation of the United States. That does not include, you know, the stolen people, the people murdered, the destroyed lives, none of this, just the free work. I mean, that's big. And third and finally, we should make models that have new relationships with land. Land, you know, needs to be this biosphere where people and non-human beings live together, and we need to say, okay, the needs of humans, they should not be the center for sure, you know, it's like species discrimination. We need to have this like post-human economics, you know, where all species are worth the same. So, let me conclude. I want to end optimistically. I want to say, it is not too late. We can open the belly of the wolf and extract these good feminist models, okay? We take out the good, and it's not too late. And if we employ these models and get them to the policymakers, then there may be a chance for a good life for potential future generations. Thank you.